Are all Welshmen able to sing like a lark? It seems to be a national trait, and
no, they don't all sing like larks, but I know there was a famous Welshman, for instance, who was famous for his music, actually, a man called Ivan Novello, whose full name was Ivan Novello Davis. And he was a Welshman. He couldn't sing a note, but he wrote those musicals that went on forever and ever. You know, it was, I've forgotten what they were called now, but The Dancing Years, and I think he wrote Keep the Home Fires Burning and stuff like that, but he couldn't sing a note. And I remember his telling me once that he did a tour of hospitals during the war, and a piano was, and he played his famous numbers. And in one ward they asked him to sing, and he said, I can't sing, and they refused to believe him. And there was a lady who accompanied him on the tour. She was Welsh too. And he said, Daphne, you sing. And she said, I can't sing either. So they tried to sing, and I didn't believe him. And I said, well, sing for me now. And he said, well, what do you want me to sing? And I said, well, sing The Minstrel Boy to the War Hath Gone, or something. And he sang, and it really was the most extraordinary cacophony, I believe the word is. And it really was The Minstrel Boy to the War Has Gone. I mean, he couldn't do it at all. And I don't understand that.
Oh, he ended up in the musical world. It's
very strange, yes. So he could pick out a tune, but he was tone deaf.
I thought the green valleys of Wales always rang with the natural voices of the...
Oh, yes, for the most part, I think we sing rather better than most people. I don't know whether it's the coal dust in the air or the eternal rain. Yeah. But certainly most Welsh people sing mellifluously.
Yeah. How do you say what looks like Pontrhydyfen?
Pontrhydyfen. Pontrhydyfen.
Pontrhydyfen.
Means the bridge. We have a lot of Latin in our language. It means the bridge across the vale or the valley.
Yeah.
And there is a bridge that crosses my village from mountain to mountain.
And that's the village you were born in?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know why. I had an image of your childhood as being upper class somehow, and been to Oxford, and undoubtedly was to the manor born, if that's the right use of that. And it was anything but that. I wonder how many other people are under the same mistaken...
No, I had a very happy childhood. We were pretty poor. Yeah. It was during the Depression. My father was a miner, and all my brothers except one, my younger brother, were miners. And they all got out of the mines, except the very oldest one, who loved the mines so much that I couldn't bribe him out. I couldn't get him. There was no way I could get him out. And he stayed in until the bitter end. So that he died. He died last year. No, he died this year, actually, about 5 or 6 months ago. And you can imagine how tough the constitution of the family is, that with his lungs full of dust, he lived until he was 79. And he was very angry because he didn't make 80. Oh. But to have lived that long and to have worked, he went down the mines when he was 13 years old, and he came up when he was 65.
And he died of the lung ailment from...
Yes, pneumoconiosis.
Yeah. You weren't being sarcastic when you said he loved the mines.
Yeah,
really,
you really
I didn't know anyone loved to...
Oh, yes.
Kind of romance.
My father, who was apparently a great miner, in the days before mechanization and so on, when you got the great seam, there's a great seam, a famous seam, a world-famous one, which I believe is called the Great Atlantic Fault. And it starts in northern Spain, in the Basque country, and it goes under the Bay of Biscay, and it comes up in South Wales, and it goes under the Atlantic and comes up in Pennsylvania. So that if you took a Basque miner or a Welsh miner or a Pennsylvania miner, and if you could blindfold them and transport them, and they know the coal face the minute they saw it, I believe it's 4 feet 6 inches. And my father used to talk about it as some men will talk about women, talk about the beauty of this coal face. And my brothers would tell me stories about my father, who would look at the seam. My father's a very short man, an ideal height for a miner. He was about 5 feet 3 or 4, very, very powerful, of course. And he would look at the seam of coal, and he would, as it were, almost surgically make a mark on it, and then ask his boy. Every miner has a boy who works for him, and he would say, "Give me the number 2 mandrel." That's a half-headed pick. And then, having stared at this gorgeous display of black, shining ribbon of coal, he would then hit it with one enormous blow. And if he hit it right, something like 20 tons of coal would fall out from the coal face.
Really?
So that it was thrilling, it was exciting. And indeed, that's why I think when you perhaps think of me as being born with a silver spoon and so on, miners believed themselves anyway, to be the aristocrats of the working class. They felt superior to all other kinds of manual laborers. They were skilled workers. That coalface was a magical creature.
Has that all been replaced now by mechanized?
Yes, you drill things now and you
lost some
cut
of the
out
romance.
lumps of yes.
So your father would probably be against that.
Yeah, well, he wouldn't say that. He'd say they're not miners at all now. They're just
Machines do the work.
machines do
Yeah.
the work. Yes.
Did you have a fear of the mines? What I'm trying to say is, did you see yourself as that was something to escape, to get out into another world?
No, not at all, no. The opposite, as a matter of fact. Everybody's ambition, every little boy's ambition in my valley was to become a miner, because there was the arrogant strut of the lords of the coalface. They had these muscular buttocks and the bow legs, and they walked with a kind of arrogance, and everybody wanted to be like a miner. Wanted to stand on street corners and look at the posh people pass with hostile eyes, and insult the girls from the doctor's daughter, the lawyer's daughter, the preacher's daughter as they passed, and insult them with these cold looks because they were the kings of the underworld.
They looked down on people from below, in a sense, didn't they?
Absolutely. You are clever.
Oh, yes.
You invert things so beautifully.
You'll notice that more and more as we go along.
How many days is this show going to last? Because my feet are starting to get cold. Can I put my boots back on?
Yes, you can, in fact. And for those who just joined us, he has shoes with him, and you put them on at any time. I don't want you to take cold, as we say in Midwestern America. Does one take cold in your part
Yes,
of the
one
world?
does.
One
Yes.
takes cold.
One draws a bath.
Yeah.
One takes a cold. Some of those things need a great deal of explanation, don't they? How does one draw a bath?
How does one draw a bath? You pull it out of the...
I draw you a bath.
Do you take after your father, do you think?
Yes, in many ways, yes.
If I met him, would I see you in some ways?
Yes, apart from the accent, we look very much alike. And especially the older I get, the more like him I look. I'm much taller than he was, of course, and that's about... when I was younger, too, I was much more muscular. And also we both had, to put it mildly, a predilection for strong liquor. And I suppose he died of it, but it took 83 years to knock him off. He was a remarkable fella in many ways. He spoke perfect English and on occasions pretended that he couldn't.
As opposed to Welsh, you mean?
As opposed to our native tongue, which is Welsh. And, well, I remember when he was 79, do you mind if I tell you a short story about him?
No, like it.
When he was 40 years old, he got into a terrible fight with a chap called Jeremiah John. And this bridge that I told you that spans the valley, the fight took place at one end of the bridge. And anyway, in the course of the fight, my father was he was 40 years old. He was knocked over this sort of piping, and he fell from the end of the bridge, that side of the valley, shall we say. And though it wasn't a straight fall, it was a really precipitous slope, and it was 85 feet. And he didn't break a bone or anything like that. Like all drunks, they're very lucky in that way. But he was in pretty bad shape, apparently. Well, when he was 79 years old, almost 40 years later, I went home. By this time, I'd earned a little money, and so I was pretty flush. I'd made my first film in Hollywood and so on, and everybody thought I was a multi-millionaire, but I went home, and I went immediately to see my father, and I took him to the pub, and we had drinks, and he said, "What's that you're ordering?" And I said, "It's an American drink." I said, "It's called a Boilermaker." He said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, usually it's a rye, which we don't have in this country, and except we were speaking in Welsh, of course." And I said, "You chase it with a beer." But I said, in Britain, I do it with rum. "Oh, good idea," he said. So he had a rum, and then he chased it with a pint of beer, and then he had another, and then we had about 3 together. And then I had to leave and go and I have an enormous family, so I had to go around and visit. So I left my father. I gave him a £5 note. My brother said, "Don't give him money," but anyway, I left him. Couldn't. So he paid off all the debts that he had. And a £5 note in those days was a considerable amount of money. And anyway, dissolved. And in the middle of the night, I was staying with one of my sisters. In the middle of the night, there was a thunderous knocking on the door. And it was with no telephones at home in those days. And it was the local policeman. And he said that my father was in hospital in a place called Pontrhydyfen, and he was asking for me and from one of my brothers called Ivor, as you would say. So I got into my car and I drove like mad. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. Drove like mad to pick up my brother, who was staying with another sister. And we tore off to the hospital. And there was a lady doctor and a man doctor. And we went to the emergency thing. And they came out and they said, "Does anyone here speak Welsh?" And my brother and I said, we speak Welsh. They said, "Because we've got a man in here who doesn't speak English." So I said, "Okay, we'll come in and translate for you." So we went in, and my father was lying there, and I suddenly realized how little he was. You know, he'd shrunk with age, and he was virtually naked lying there. And he had a bruise on his stomach that was as big as a rugby football. You know, it was enormous, like a pregnant woman. And otherwise, nothing broken. And he was singing quietly to himself. And he'd fallen off the other end of the bridge. It's true.
At 79, he'd managed
At 79, he'd
to
fallen off the other end of the bridge, and he landed on what we call a golven. A golven is a dead tree, which has grown out of stonework, and it had grown out of this ancient bridge that crosses the valley, and he'd fallen and impaled himself. I mean, on his stomach on the tree, and he couldn't get off. He's very drunk, and it was a wild night, fortunately, because one of the miners coming home from work heard this singing, and he decided to take a shortcut up the side of the mountain rather than round by the road because the night was so wild. And fortunately he did, and he heard this singing, and he went to the source of the song, and he found my father. And he couldn't get him off. Miner, strong as he was, he couldn't get him off either, so he ran up, and he got down nephews and stuff, and they finally got him off the thing, and he was happy as a lark. So anyway, there he was in hospital, and the lady doctor, who was English, said, "Would you ask him if he knows who you are?" I'd explained that he was my father. So I said, I always called him Dick. I said, "Dick, ti napoli? Do you know me?" And then in flawless English he said, "Only too bloody well."
It's a shame he didn't live to 120. He could have gone off the center of the bridge. And
Well, that's what he said, as a matter of fact. He said, yes, he said, "Well, I've been off one side of the bridge when I was 40. I'm off the other side of the bridge when I'm 79. All I need to do is to go off the middle of the bridge, and I shall ascend to heaven in a shower of angels."
Sorry, I didn't know him. When you were doing his voice just then, it reminded me of my grandfather, who came from Carmarthen.
Oh, yes.
And there was that slight trill on the R's.
Yes.
And he always said, "Well, if I ever."
Yes.
And we've got
Yes, it's a very attractive accent. I think those who speak Welsh and English, the ones who are monoglot English, the accent is a little sharp and I think rather unattractive. But the bilingual Welshmen, when they speak English, the accent is very...
It's lovely to listen to.
Yes.
But what did he make of your profession? It's so different from his.
He was very, very puzzled. I remember going home once and I went to the house where he was staying. He used to change. My mother had been dead since I was 2, so he lived with one sister for, shall we say, 6 months or a year, and then he'd move and go to another sister and so on. So I went to the particular sister he was staying with, and I said, Le ma ve, which is Welsh for, where is he? And she said, Let in meddwl, which means, where do you think? So I said, thank you, and went to the pub. And there he was indeed. And he was wearing a pair of Woolworths glasses, you know, the kind you go in and you try on it, you get a pair of, which had lost one lens and one thing, and it was tied behind his ear with a string. And he was reading the newspaper. And he squinted at me because by this time, I've been so many years in the mines, he had astigmatism of the eyes from coal dust. And he peered at me because he has 7 sons, you know, and he said, Pwy yn ti, which means, which one are you? And I said, I'm rich. Oh, yes. And he said, I've been reading in the papers here that you're getting $50,000 for 12 weeks work in that Hollywell. I said, he said, that's not true, is it? I said, no. He said, oh, I thought it wasn't. I said, it's $150,000. He stared at me as well as he could through those astigmatized eyes and said, what for?
It's a good question, isn't it? Yeah, even you were stuck for an answer to that, I suppose.
Yes, well, I couldn't explain. I still can't explain.
How can you?
I still don't understand what happened to me.
Yeah.
It's a remarkable
Still
business.
seems-
I mean, I came into it by accident, and I still think everybody's insane when they pay me so much money for doing what we all do at home.
Yeah. I wonder if that's true of almost all actors who get the enormous financial success, that it seems like some kind of dream, and therefore, because it does seem like a dream, it could also just evaporate and suddenly be...
Oh, yes, I think that one of the actor's nightmares is the fact that one of these days somebody's going to find out.
Mm-hmm. It's going to catch you.
And catch me.